Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, you're all well this evening. I'm joined today by a sister who is a qualified therapist and counsellor that specialises in couples therapy and marriage counselling. We've not really had a chance to talk yet, but Sister Fahima, welcome. Assalamu alaikum. How are you? Are you okay today? Have you had a good day?
Wa alaikum salam. I'm good. It's been a good day, good enough. Just the technical issues joining, but I'm glad I've made it. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm really good, alhamdulillah. I'm so glad that you made it too. I know we've been planning this for a couple of weeks now, and I've been really excited to have you on, as we've got a lot of sort of important topics to discuss that will no doubt benefit sisters as well as brothers, inshallah. But before we sort of get into all of that sort of deep stuff, it would be good for the viewers to learn more about you as a person. You're a fellow British South Asian Muslim, woman with, proud Bangladeshi heritage. So if you could please briefly, share about your personal upbringing as a Bengali Muslim woman in the UK, as well as your professional background.
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in East London, which is predominantly the South Asian Bangladeshi community. That was back in the 80s. So I'm 36. So I grew up then where a lot of the community started off there. It was different in the sense where my upbringing was a very mix between cultural stuff as well as Islamic stuff and trying to kind of navigate those things. My parents knew as much as they did, but a lot of it was mixed. I think for me, one of the biggest kind of unraveling was when I was a teen, trying to kind of figure out where the faith aspect of everything is, where the traditional cultural aspect of everything is. And I think one of the biggest factor in that has been when I went to a boarding school where I learned the religion in a better way and just kind of separating, what's culture and what's, the Islamic way of life. So that was one of my highlights. And then kind of after that, when I started my journey in studying and kind of being more and more curious about mental health, it was one of those things where I would ask myself, we don't really talk about it enough. I haven't heard about it enough. And
No.
it doesn't mean people are not suffering or they're not struggling with it. It's just, it's not spoken about enough. There's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of taboo around that. So I think that was one of the things that really stood out for me. And my career kind of came in a way where I was working in a domestic violence service and I was working alongside of other therapists and I was frontline as a admin. And then I went back into studying and I started my journey there.
Wow, that is amazing. And it's right. I mean, alhamdulillah, sister, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you more success in your personal and your professional life. Up here in Scotland, we don't actually have a massive Bangladeshi community compared to the Pakistani community. But I know in England, mashallah, there are very prominent and flourishing Bangladeshi communities. But as South Asian Muslims, we have so much in common anyway. I don't think it doesn't really depend on, what community you're from. We're all quite connected in a lot of ways and we can relate to each other. And I can relate to your story a lot. I mean, we definitely growing up, I had, you have Pakistani culture, you have Islam, which isn't a culture, it's your faith. And then you also have British culture as well, like you have that as well when you're going to schools here. And like you said, we both grew up in an era where mental health wasn't talked about as much, certainly not by our parents. And these days, there is a lot more awareness and discussion around the topic of mental well-being, which I think is such a good thing, especially for Muslim people, especially for South Asian Muslims, because it's such a stigma, like you said. What do you think is the most common sort of mental health issues you see in Muslims, and what solutions can you suggest? It's quite a big question, I know.
It is. So, I mean, I work with a lot of individuals within our community that are Muslims, so not predominantly South Asians. I work with kind of a lot
Yeah.
of people of color, as well as doing couples therapy and premarital. So, looking at the cohort that I work with in this era, one of the things, I mean, there's so many different things, but some of the things would be there is a lot of anxiety and, this need of perfectionism because they feel like they're not good enough or there's pressure around conforming into, you know, traditional ways, and that could be external pressure. A huge one would be low mood and depression, and that really stems from lack of connection, isolation, people not feeling that they can speak to others, or they feel like the support system is very small, and that's really adding to individuals just really isolating themselves and staying indoors. Or, you know, we talk about being on social media, we talk about scrolling, and that is hugely because there's a lot of lack in connection and community, and I see that so much when I speak to clients. I work specifically around family dynamics and relational work, so within that there's, you know, the struggles around family ties, there's struggles around marital issues, which is a huge one. But when we think about all of these things, the root is a lot of people just not feeling so connected with themselves or who they are and what they want and where they can have some guidance.
No, that's really true. And I think especially like you said, in our community, a lot of the times parents sort of dictate the way they want their kids to be, and you don't really get a chance to think, well, who am I and who do I want to be? And then a lot of the time, a lot of issues, like you said, do stem from that lack of connection. And a lot of that time starts from, you know, what do they say, like the first 7 years of your life is when you build an attachment, and you know, and so if you don't have that good attachment, a lot of the times that can then create problems later on. And a lot of the most common problems, like you said, that I notice these days are things like anxiety, depression, and anger. And a lot of the times it's linked to, like I said, early life trauma. And like you said, in the modern era, is usually due to people living their life on screens. And it's not just scrolling, but it's also like many people are not able to decipher between marketing and reality now these days. Comparing themselves against unrealistic posts and metrics that don't accurately represent real world scenarios. And I actually had a conversation the other day, and someone was saying to me, you know, oh, I wish I was like this person, and you know, look how she gets up in the morning and she gets on with her day. And I was like, you know, she has to like get out of bed to set the camera up, to get back in bed, to pretend to get out of bed. Like, she probably doesn't wake up like that. And people just don't know how to switch off. And I mean, there are obviously, you know, mental health issues that are linked to other external things like diet, lack of exercise, substance misuse also. Unconscious and unresolved childhood trauma, I think, is usually the main reason for it. And you know, as I mentioned, you specialize in marriage counselling, and you just mentioned, you know, marriage counselling there. And it's so important to be aware of mental health issues and to be on top of one's mental well-being before even entering marriage. And a lot of us don't do that. You know, we enter into a marriage and then we realize, hold on, I've got a problem and you've got a problem, and then you have kids, and then you know, a lot of that isn't actually resolved until after you start building your own family. And one of the things that you do, which I think is amazing, is premarital counselling. So a lot of people might not be aware of it, but what is and why is premarital counselling important for Muslim couples specifically?
We know when we think about a nikah how sacred it is in Islam, right? It's a contract. And just like any other contract, each individual needs to know what their roles and responsibilities are. And if you don't talk about it, you are going in blindly in your marriage. So, you know, I really root for premarital counseling. Why? Because, you know, there's one thing sitting with family and asking questions to each other, and we know that's already anxiety provoking, and you can't even be yourself, and then you've got everyone staring at you, and how, you know, that can, you know, really take who you are away, and you're kind of in this pretense, and how you're behaving. So I think with premarital counseling, it's a space where you're with someone who doesn't know you both, is completely neutral, and it's a space where you can have open and honest conversations. You can talk about anything, whether it's finance, whether it's in-laws, whether it's family dynamics, whether it's intimacy, and, you know, the things that you didn't get to talk about or you're scared to talk about. You know, that's the space where you can talk about your fears. You can talk about what you hope the marriage to look like, what your expectations are, your needs are. And it's not about this isn't right or this is wrong. It's about being able to say in a space that feels safe enough to say, and then see how the other responds to it. I think one of the things when we think about premarital counseling, you're going in well informed, as opposed to going in a marriage and something comes up and you haven't thought about how we're going to navigate it and you decide to run. You know, a huge one is our community doesn't know how to have conflict resolution skills, and when that happens, you may have grown up in a place where your mum has given silent treatment or your dad has resorted to shouting, and that's the way you deal with it now. But unfortunately, those are not healthy, and it's causing a disconnect between you and your partner. So premarital counseling just opens up such a space for both to be as transparent as possible, hoping to build something, knowing, being well informed to build something towards, you know, a longer lasting relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. And I would encourage anyone that is wanting to get married and looking to get married and have made that commitment to each other to do premarital counselling before they get married. Because, you know, even though, like you said, you know, you have your nikah contract, and in Islam, we know the roles and responsibilities, it's written down. But sometimes people don't really have, they're not connected because, you know, liberalism comes into it, like we said, culture comes into it. And people don't actually discuss these things until later on. Or, like we say, what is it? Like you've got blinkers on, like love blinkers on, and you
Yeah.
don't realize, like, actually, there's important stuff that's going to come out later on.
Absolutely. And I like the fact that you mentioned the cultural aspect, because, you know, one of the things that comes out often in the therapy space is, you know, there are cultural values as well as the Islamic values. When you're thinking about two people who have grown up in their own environment that has looked different. So you have to create a space to think, okay, where is my faith aligning here? Maybe this person had the, you know, privileges of Islamic upbringing, and maybe this person hasn't. How are we colliding both our worlds together?
Mm, It's so true. You make really good points, sister. And I also just want to say that, you know, if someone is already married and they've not gone through premarital counselling. I mean, it's a very new thing, I think. Maybe it's been around for a while, but for me, I've not really known much about it. You're not a lost cause. There are plenty of other types of marriage counselling and therapy, you know, that you can tap into should you need it. I'm sure Sister Fahima could help with that also if you get in touch with her. And we're going to cover other things later on in the show as well. But staying on track with the premarital stuff, you know, in the West, we know now divorce rates are really high amongst, you know, non-Muslims. Oh no, we lost you. Have you lost me? Hold on.
I haven't lost you.
Hello? Oh, I'm here.
I can hear.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, you haven't gone.
Right. I was just saying, like, staying on track with the premarital stuff, you know, in the West, divorce rates are quite high amongst non-Muslims and even Muslims as well, if we're being honest. You know, it's seeping into the younger Western and Muslim community also, especially compared to previous generation. Our parents, you know, would have stayed together no matter what happened, and now everyone's like 3 months later getting divorced. So I think it is really important that we prepare people before they get married, and that also people before they get married, they screen for the correct spouse from an Islamic perspective, as well as in terms of long-term compatibility. Now, this can mean different things, but I think sometimes what people take this as, I've got a massive list. This is all my boxes that need to be ticked. And if you don't do that, I can't get married. And then we have women and men that are in their late 30s and still not married because they have this list. But if we're talking about it from an Islamic perspective, what do you think are red flags and green flags that both men and women should screen for in potential future spouses?
So, honestly, I've tried to move away from the term red flag and green flags, and I'll tell you why. I think we've come to a place where there, you know, is something we're dealing with the black and white thinking, and a lot of that is getting lost. The nuances is getting lost. So when I think about red flags and green flags, there is space for that to even become green. There is space for the green to become red, okay, depending on the two people who are trying to build a relationship together. What I would say is, and I'm moving away from the extreme cases of abuse, etc., which I see as red, right? I'm thinking about when you meet someone, what you do want to know is the willingness to try, the willingness to connect with you, the willingness to, you know, love you and have empathy for you and keep themselves accountable. So one of the things I would always say is when you're connecting with someone, you want to see if they can make space for you in their world? Both of you, can you make space for each other in their world? You know, maybe you have difference of opinion, but what would that look like when you're, you know, sharing it together? What would that look like? And the biggest green flag around that is someone is saying, okay, I know this is the way I've done things, but I can see that for him it's so important, and I want to make space for him. Or I can see how important this is for her. This aspect that she does now is important for her. How am I willing to make that change? You know, if they are someone who can't be accountable, who get defensive, who are like, okay, this, you know, this is me, and that's the way it is, what they're showing to you is they're not willing to change. This is the way they're set to be. And even when conflicts arise, they're not going to listen. You're not going to feel heard. If they are someone who would be like, okay, it's just about my family and that's it, and they can't create a balance between you, your family, or you and his family, then what's happening is, you know, you're going to feel like you have just sacrificed. I think one of the big things is you want to see that both can make space for each other, even if that means that when you get married, of course, life would look different, responsibilities look different. But even if that means both of you are leaving things for yourself and each other, because it's about the relationship, you want to know willingness. The thing about the red and green flag, people then lead towards perfectionism, and we're not. You know, this is something that you'll never reach in that point once you are in this world. So, you know, what you do want to see is the willingness. Are they forgiving? Do they show mercy when you do mess up? And what will that look like? It's about accepting you with your flaws and working together.
And I like that. And I've heard that there was somebody that said to me recently about a marriage having love and mercy. And mercy is not really something I've ever heard about when it comes to marriage. But actually, when you think about it, it is something that is really needed, because as human beings, we are all different. And when two people come together, there has to be mercy there, because you will make mistakes. You know, one will make a mistake, the other one will make a mistake. And if you don't have mercy for each other, it will never resolve. Like you said, conflict resolution, you'll always have that resentment, you'll always hold on to that mistake, and things will never change. And I do like what you said, yeah, about sort of talking about red flags and green flags. I understand why. Yes, because, you know, like we're saying, people will think of it as like a way to perfectionism has to get met, and no one is perfect, you know, and everyone will make mistakes. No one will tick all of your boxes, but it's just to make some people aware of sort of major things to avoid, as well as maybe some traits to look for in a spouse that will result in possibly a healthy long-term marriage. You know, some things, one of the green flags that obviously we should look for in both men and women are people who pray regular salah. You know, because if anyone who fulfills their duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will more than likely fulfill their duties to their spouse, and they won't have that like not willingness to change, because they will understand, you know, they'll have that humbleness about them, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. And this is where, like, when you're having these conversations around values and faith and what is core to you, and you're like, actually, I want someone that is God-fearing. I want someone who is kind. I want someone who is respectful. You know, the list that you talk about, this long list, you know, we can write so many things there, but we do really need to look at what is the core things that's so important for me in this person, right? And if I have this relationship with my faith, I want someone to have the same relationship with their faith, because then that is what's holding your marriage.
Yeah, definitely. And there are actually some that I want to just quickly run by you and see what you think about them. So things that I've had come up with people talk to me is one red flag, shall we say, that some people mention, in both men and women, obviously, is a lack of religious practice, bad relationships with their parents, and having friends of the opposite gender. So those are the three. What do you think about those three in particular?
So the first one you mentioned is the lack of connection with their faith. I think one of the biggest things around that is if there's no connection with the faith, then as Muslims, if you know, faith is not just, you know, a faith, it's our way of life. So if you see someone who is disconnected with the faith, and you are connected, and you are someone who use that as a guidance, as a tool to get through your way of life, then I wouldn't encourage you to give that person a chance, because you're already heading to a mess, for sure. In terms of, you know, relationship with parents, there are so many different nuances around that due to generational trauma, right? So I would say we need to have some grace in that. If people have difficult relationship with their parents, I think what you want to pay attention to is how do they speak about their parents? Where is it coming from in terms of like when they are connecting with you? Are they, in that place of, not doing any work on their healing? Because when we're talking about intergenerational traumas, because it's such an important topic for me when I talk about family dynamics, I work with clients that have been in really abusive, family homes where unfortunately parents haven't been great, and they are suffering, the kids are suffering. So if they are not doing that work, then there's a room for this person who hasn't done any work to project a lot on you.
Yeah.
And that will be very difficult. So one of the things I would say is if you can see this person has a very difficult relationship with the parents, and if they are still speaking in a way where you can feel the energy, the hatred or the anger is very much there, you want to ask them, what are they doing?
Yeah, about it.
What support are they getting for that? Because it's not that it's their fault for what they went through, but what's not fair is if they are projecting and treating you in a horrible way because of what they went through.
Yeah, I like that. That's very true, and I definitely do agree because, like we said, the older generation, they lived a tough life, and they were tough people. I think a lot of the time we aren't as tough in the way that we just get on with things. Not to, and they did suffer, but they suffered in silence, I think, in a way where now we are lucky that we don't need to do that, and we can speak about it, and we can solve these issues. And not then pass it on to our kids that will then also have that trauma. The other sort of two things that I want to discuss is in terms of the roles we were talking about earlier, Islamically. So Islamically, green flags we would say would be a husband that is, being financially responsible for the household, protecting his wife in terms of safety and honor. And then for a red flag would be a man that's financially irresponsible and has a lack of courage.
Yeah.
I personally would add sort of fitness in there as well, because I think a man who's in good shape and is strong enough and skilled enough to defend himself and his family, it shows, so he has discipline. And then on the opposite side, we have women. So Islamically, green flags in a wife is someone that wants to have children, a woman that can cultivate, a good environment in a household and is compliant towards her husband and is well-mannered. And then obviously a red flag is someone that doesn't dress modest and is very liberal in their outlook, with feminism being a big thing just now. I'm not going to go too much into that, but, like that sort of way. So what are your thoughts on those sort of roles? And should we be putting a lot of emphasis on those specific roles when looking into getting married?
You have a really good point when you share that. When I think about what you said as a man and what his role is financially and being a protector, and what a woman, what her role is, and if these things are not there, then if we use the term red flag, honestly speaking, with the crisis of people wanting to get married, it becomes a huge obstacle, right? So on one hand, if it's on your list, I want a man that's a provider, excellent, right? Do not move away from that core thing that you do want, because what will happen is then you're going to resent him if he's unable to, either way, right? Or if she is unable to. But the issue is now a lot of women are working. A lot of women are working, and because they're working, it's becoming difficult to do their role. And because the man is working and it's not enough because of the climate we're living in, it's causing a lot of issues between couples. So I see a lot of couples, both of them are working and they are still struggling. And I just kind of think, well, what is the solution when it comes to that? Because if we want a man to be a provider, excellent. And if he is struggling, and a woman is saying, actually, no, I don't want to get married to you because you're unable to provide for me, where does that leave the guy and the woman?
Yeah, because it's not fair, because then we are in this age now where women have to work because, like we're saying, lifestyle And even just cost of living is insane. Women have to work. But then there is the expectation, well, you still have to do your role. You know, you still have to look after the children and the house and everything else. And you know, it's difficult because I don't think men have made that shift yet, if I'm honest, of the woman is sort of doing more, so to speak. And ideally, in a perfect world, the man would be the one that is financially responsible and the woman just stays at home, like we did when our, you know, and our parents in the older generation, that's what they did.
Mm.
Nowadays, like you said, it's almost not feasible
Mm.
to do that. And it's a shame.
It's a shame, and it's I think what it is doing is creating a lot of, you know, resentment towards each other. I think when we see some of the stuff that's online, it's really sad, because actually there's a bigger issue here. It's because the other one can't fulfill, we're blaming and we're shaming, and actually there's a bigger issue here, which is that shift isn't happening. Whether it's, okay, I'm going to do it, I'm going to be the provider, I'm going to be the protector, you nurture the home, you build the home, and I will support you. But unfortunately, because there's a, you know, imbalance now,
Mm.
it's creating, you know, unhappiness within the homes.
Mhm. Yeah, 100% agree. We've got a super chat here. Is asked, Oi is asked, what's your advice for a Muslim convert man looking for a Muslim woman to marry? I'm a convert and don't really have the family background I think my wife would appreciate since I'm a Muslim, but my family is not. I'm practicing, alhamdulillah. Sister, I'll let you answer first and then I'll give my take on what I think.
Oh, it's gone. So I might need to say that again. So advice around a Muslim convert marrying someone.
So he's looking to get married, and he's just wondering, you know, what's your advice for a Muslim convert man looking for a Muslim woman to marry?
I would kind of think about some of the things that are really important to you, like we spoke about, whether they are a convert or not. One of the biggest things is around values and beliefs, and you want to kind of ask them, you know, some things that are important to you where that aligns with them as well. I think when it comes to interracial marriages or anything like that, it's not just the two people. There's a lot of, you know, external voices that adds pressure or, you know, rejects it, and you know, there's a lot of heartache around that. So one of the things is, when you both are connecting, you know, and you're looking for marriage, it would be, you know, what aligns and what are some of the things that are not so important, that are, you know, that isn't faith related, or, you know, how, when things get tough, how are you both going to navigate it together?
I definitely agree. And I think on the back of that, I would just say that if you are a Muslim convert, a lot of the times one of the issues is even finding a Muslim woman. Where do they go? Because they're not, you know, they don't know. And I would definitely recommend go to your local mosque, go pray your salah there regularly, build a brotherhood with the brothers there, build relationships with them, and tell them that you're looking for marriage. And even the staff at the masjid should be able to help you with finding someone, inshallah, that is on your list, shall we say?
Yes, I believe there's a lot of different groups and apps. I think I saw you do one as well.
Yes, simply Nikah.
Yeah,
Yes,
so try those and have a see if it feels safe enough, then do so, of course.
definitely. Yeah, definitely be wary of specific apps. But that one is a really good app. It's very Islamic and very halal. So I want to move on to marriages that have already happened without any of the premarital stuff. So what are the most sort of common themes that you've noticed in marriages that are in turmoil, and how do you think this can be solved? And I know again it's a very big question, but sort of
Mhm.
the biggest things that you regularly see.
I remember the first question you asked, and you did ask for a solution, and I didn't give that, but I'll just touch on it. I think one of the things I do want to say is having that connection between getting support for your mental health, not to see it as an obstacle, but adding to the faith element, because self-care is a part of faith, right?
Yeah.
So we want to have conversations around mental health in our homes with our family. If we can go and see a doctor for our physical health, we can see a mental health professional for our mental health. So, you know, we want to see, you know, faith and support for our mental health interconnected and not an obstacle. Um, And moving on to your question now around couples that I do see now and the themes, a huge one is lack of connection, lack of conflict resolution, and then the family, the in-laws, and how that plays a huge role because of the conditions we were raised in. So that comes up a lot. So I think arguments are normal with couples. It happens, disagreements happen, but a lot of them just don't know how to work through it. Everyone's, we talk about communicating, everyone's communicating, but they're not sure, they're not paying attention to how, they're not listening to their tone, they're not listening to the words they use, they're not picking the right time. There's a lot of built up stuff that hasn't worked through, and it's just being projected on one another. There's these narratives we create in our mind, and we kind of think each of the opposite person as the worst. We've got these narratives that are just not true, and that's really difficult. But there are huge light bulb moments when in couples therapy, when I see couples be like, "Oh, I didn't see it like that," and I'm like, "Oh gosh, I'm getting somewhere." It just feels so heartwarming just to hear that. "Oh, I didn't see it like that. Oh, how come you think that way?" And just being curious about someone's world, that I think we make a lot of assumptions about just because they're Muslim, then of course they should know this, or just because they're Bangladeshi, they should know how I'm doing things. But we need to understand that we are all in different homes, raised in different ways, and even though we might have shared experiences, it still looks different. So a lot of that comes up. The in-law dynamic is a huge one. It's a huge, painful one, I must say. And I think one of the ones within that is like trying to navigate between wife and between the in-laws, and still trying to lead the way in that. They're so torn. But I always see it as a positive. When they walk through the doors, the first thing I say is, well, this is a positive in itself. You both want to make the marriage work. You want to, you're thinking of solutions. That's positive to both of you.
Yes, definitely. And I would encourage, and I think it's still a bit of a stigma to go for marriage counselling, if I'm honest. I think that people are still a bit like, don't know if I want to do it, especially men, I think, because they have to open up and talk about their feelings and things like that, whereas women sort of need that. But I would definitely recommend it. And I think when it comes to marriages that are in turmoil, definitely people, I think, like you were saying, when you're having that conflict, you tend to sort of double down on what you believe in and not admit fault or admit wrong, even if you think you are, because you don't want to break, but you forget that actually this person is my opposite. We're supposed to be there for, and it's okay if I break, and it's okay if I admit fault, and that person will forgive me and should forgive me. And like you said, it's communication is so important, but how to communicate, communicating in a calm, collected and caring dialogue rather than shouting at each other and blaming each other. Tensions and resentments can grow and it can turn into something very ugly, and then future conflicts will just bring up past conflicts and it just becomes a bit of a mess. I think that way. But one thing that I wanted to touch on, and I wanted to get your take on this, is I've noticed a lot, maybe because I've got two girls, so we've just had kids. My last one was 2 years ago, 2.5, mashallah. But I've noticed a lot now that couples have kids, and it puts a strain on their on their marriages. And a lot of the time people don't expect it. It's like a slap in the face, and even though people talk about it, it still is quite a thing. And I think for women, there's a lot to deal with, in terms of being responsible for children. You go through a pregnancy, you go through a birth, and you have your life stops and you have to look after this child full time.
Yeah.
Basically sacrifice everything in your life to look after the kids. And even though people tell you about it, you don't actually realize it until it happens. And a lot of the times things like postnatal depression could be going on, and that makes it even more difficult. And then, like we were saying, in-laws, and that can actually increase, because in-laws then have a take on their grandchild, and that can cause more conflict. It's stressful to adjust, you know, to a whole new way of life. And then on the opposite end, you know, men, and it's not talked about enough, but men do, I think, sometimes go through postnatal depression in some ways too, you know, and there's an added pressure of financial responsibility as well as, you know, their protective nature going into overdrive regarding their children. And a lot of the times a man's wife is then not emotionally or even physically available to him like she was before kids. And a lot of these things can be worked through, but it's a lot to deal with, you know. So what are your take, and do you have couples that go in, and do you see that the marriage has broken down more so after the children have come?
That transition is really hard. And, you know, I'm going to use the word patient in this, but not in a way where I am using it to dismiss the struggles. What I think there's a level of patience that both of them need with each other, because when you think about someone who hasn't had kids before and then has kids, that in itself is a transition. It's just not mentally, you know, a woman's body and how that plays a part, and how we might see ourselves when our body goes through that change. And you know, the struggle around a man not knowing how to support her. She doesn't even know how to support herself, because she's thinking, what is this? All this time everyone said, oh no, you know, when you see this child, you're going to fall in love with this child, and the pain, you wouldn't even remember it. You will remember the pain, you will. But what, you know, the context is missing. What they're saying is, this child is so beautiful, is someone, the child you're going to connect with. And yes, the pain was there, but you know, I think what we're doing is dismissing it, and we have romanticized this idea of what it will be like. And if we just have really honest conversations, then we are prepping the newly mothers and the newly fathers. um, when I speak to women, one of the things they say is, I've lost myself. You
Yeah.
know, I don't even know. And you know, one of the huge things around that is, when they have intrusive thoughts, it is scary. Intrusive thoughts are scary. Even if they're thoughts like, okay, I'm going to harm my child. Do I even love my child? You know, they start resenting this child for, you know, having that change, that transition in life. And these are intrusive thoughts, but then they start feeling bad, they start feeling shame. What, I'm such a bad mother. And then trying to have a safe space to tell someone these things, they often met with judgment. So if I was to say this to my husband, how would he respond? Oh my god, how could you even say something like that, when actually these are intrusive thoughts and she's struggling with it, she doesn't know what to do with them. And I think if our community knew that actually these things are so normal and what the right support looks like, they would ask for it even more. But they don't know how to support each other, and they don't know how to support themselves, because it's so alienating. They never heard of it before.
Mm.
It does put a strain, because not only with a child, but also a lot of couples stop spending time together. So there's a disconnect with each other, and they're not making that time, because a lot of that time and attention is going on the child. I have to help my child, and you know, feed my child, and you know, what you would see as connection time, day and night. So whatever, you're not doing those things anymore, and slowly it just becomes about the child, when actually you need to keep harmony with each other to be able to be there for the child as well as each other.
And I think a lot of another misconception is people think, you know, well, okay, this is 5 years or until the kid goes to school and then we'll get back to normal. And it doesn't. By that point, it's too late. You know, everything's sort of broken, and you maybe not be able to get back to normal. And it's such an important subject, because I've just been through it, and I did go through postnatal depression. And I would urge any new mothers that are struggling or think something doesn't feel right, definitely go and get support, whether it is your GP, whether it is, you know, family or friends that you can talk to. Definitely try and get the support and talk about it. Don't, and I don't want to say to people, don't go on medication, but don't make that the first option, you know, unless it's really extreme. I would definitely recommend talking about your emotions and your thoughts, and getting that help. So yes. Well, we're going to move on to a sort of tricky and controversial topic, which is multiple wives. And I'm interested to know if you've ever dealt with this, because I'm also interested to know what you think about this topic, and if you've seen it in your professional life. So what are your thoughts on multiple wives in an Islamic context?
So I'm smiling at this because, you know, I think I have worked, not so many, but in my experience, 12 years, I have come across couples who have multiple wives, or had, shall I say. I mean, I don't have thoughts on it per se. I mean, we know what the Islamic ruling is there. So just putting that here. I think what comes up for me is where I'm seeing people are struggling to get married, whether they are financially struggling, whether it is connecting with others, or people are struggling to maintain the marriage that they have already. For me to think about second, third, fourth wife is just it in my world with the clientele I have feels very far from reach. I think one of the biggest things is if you feel like, yes, I am, I am happy and content in my first marriage, and I'm providing for her and she's happy, excellent, that, and then there's a room for discussion. But if it's not, I would say nourish your first marriage first before you think about that. The issue within our community is we're using right cards a lot. This is my right, this is my right, but to a point where we are not connecting and building a connection through rights, and that's not building a connection. And what I mean by that is if you come to a point where you connect with your wife and then you're thinking about, actually, I want a second wife, automatically what you're going to think about is her emotions. But if there's a lack of empathy and you think, well, I don't need to tell her, I can just get married, it's my right. You've dismissed her, you've disconnected from her. What you're saying is you don't care if she is hurt by the decision you're making. You haven't taken any preventative measures at all, when actually empathy should be a root foundation of your marriage, where you care and love each other, and you care if someone's in pain, it's hurting you as well. But it might mean that she'll say, actually, no, I don't want this. What you choose to do with that, you do, but understand that there might be consequences. There are a lot of women that are okay with second marriages, and there being another co-wife, which is fine. But I think I would say this in such a gentle way, where pour into that first one, know that you're fulfilling what you need to do before you're thinking about second, third, and fourth, and all the other things, right? Who I did work with, I think what comes up for me was she wanted children, but he already had children from his previous marriage, and he didn't want any more. And they really struggled with that. And she was looking after the first wife's kids, and she really lost herself in that process to a point that it felt like a very miserable marriage. He's not happy, she's not happy. A woman thinks about children. A lot of women think about children. They see it as their purpose to be a mother. And if she can't have those children, and she felt like she was just pouring into someone else's kids as her own, which she did, there's an emptiness there still, right? And I just want to say, think about all those things before you make a step like that.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you. And on the back of that, I would say, like you said, transparency these days is so important. In my opinion, if this is something that a man wants to do, he should say so before he gets married. That should be a part of the premarital discussion, because a woman might not want to be involved in a type of marriage arrangement, and it avoids headaches in the future. Like you said, if we have these conversations up front. And it's very difficult for a man to be able to even meet criteria of someone that is able to handle, the massive religious responsibility of polygyny. And I don't think men that sometimes go into it actually think about it, because if you are able to qualify for this financially, spiritually, physically, mentally, then, that's fine. But it's always best to be upfront before entering even your first marriage. And if you're able to do everything that you need to do in the first marriage, okay, then think about the second one. A lot of people can't deal with just one, And some people are going to disagree with me on that. And yes, it's not necessary to do so, to be upfront with your first wife. But I think it's a smart and respectful thing to do. And like you said, you need to give her that empathy and give her that. And if she says no, then yeah, it's up to you what you do with that. But that that's going to cause issues in the future. And I want to say that, also, if polygyny is something that you wouldn't want for your own daughters, then I don't think you should be doing it yourself. Because if you're okay with your daughters and sisters to be in such marriages, then you're being consistent. You should go ahead and do it. But if you aren't, then think about that's going to be somebody else's daughter that you're putting that through, and yeah, so I definitely think it's a touchy subject, but it's definitely something that's important to discuss, and it seems to be coming up a lot now. I don't know why, but it is.
Yeah, it does come up a lot. I've seen conversations about it. I even seen a sister talk about how she is okay with that, and
Yeah.
doesn't mind becoming a second wife. And you know, her reasons made sense, but even then she was getting shamed for it. Oh my God, why? So I think there will be scrutiny all the time, but ultimately you need to know what you want and be transparent from the beginning. And it's just like what we said in premarital. If you talk about it, then ultimately what you're saying is you both know what you're signing up for, and then there won't be no betrayal or feeling like you deceived me in this marriage and then leading to actually I don't want this. I think people are not going to leave marriages, but we're seeing the divorce rates. People are leaving because they don't want to put up with that.
No, and there are people that are happy. I actually had a Muslim, I had two co-wives on, they done a live with me, and they were very happy, and they really enjoyed being together, and they're bringing up their kids together. Mashallah, it was beautiful to see. So there are happy marriages that go through that as well. I want to go back a step because we were speaking obviously about children and kids coming into marriages, bringing up Muslim kids in the West, that in itself comes with its own set of challenges. And as parents, we want to protect our kids from haram, and at the same time, you want to bring them up to be savvy enough to handle all situations, especially negative ones. They will come across all people in life, and you want to give them that backing to be able to handle that. But, you also don't want them to go down the wrong path. So what have you seen, how can Muslim parents cultivate a healthy environment for their children in the long term and bring them up well in the West?
Yeah, I think, when we're talking about parents raising their children now, before it was a generation, now we've got so much access to resources. So you can really use that resources to your advantage. But what I am seeing is the more resources that are out there, the more anxiety it's giving to new parents, thinking, oh my God, what if I give my children trauma?
Yeah.
The difference is that if you were to ask yourself, what did you want from your parents? And the answers that you say to yourself, think about the difference is now you're trying to work on it, and you're trying to build a relationship with your kids. Modeling is a huge one. You need
Yes.
to be able to model healthy conflicts. It doesn't matter, if your kids are in front of you. You need them to see what it looks like to have a healthy conflict and a discussion with your husband. It's okay to have it. Of course, what it's about is important as well. They need to feel like they can come and talk to you about anything, everything without you shaming them. If it's going to be you they're going to go to, and they don't feel like they can come to you, understand that there's going to be 1,000 people outside the home that they will speak to, and maybe that won't lead to anything that you wanted, right? I think we have this idea that we want to, it's called tough love. I don't agree with that term. I really dislike that term because there's nothing tough about love. It's supposed to be soft. You want to be, your home needs to be a nurturing environment. Your home should be a space that the kids can come back and feel free and gentle, not anxiety, not fear-based, not, oh my God, my dad's going to tell me off and my mom's going to tell me off. Even when we're teaching religion, we want it to come from a guilt, fear-based religion, because it's a religion of love and mercy and all of that thing. And I say that with so much emphasis because we're going to talk about religious trauma at some point. But I say this because when we think about a child's brain and we think about an adult's brain and a loud sound, their brain is so small and they can't hack that sound. Okay, it leads to impact when they're growing up. But a lot of the times when we're raising children, we use really, really heavy words, which is the same as sounds, that has an impact for children. So we need to think about, if I'm speaking to this 5-year-old, if I'm speaking to this 10-year-old, how am I going to do it in a gentle way, as well as getting them, building a relationship that they can come to me.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I like what you said about modeling, because it's funny recently, actually quite a while recently, with everything going on in the world, me and my husband will have discussions, and everything that's going on in the Middle East and stuff, we have such quite passionate discussions about it, and we could be quite loud, and my husband is quite a loud person, and my kids will sit and watch us, and sometimes we stop and they're just watching how we're interacting, and they stop and they're maybe playing, and they'll just stop and they'll think, is something going on here? What's happening? Like, why are they getting so are they shouting at us, or like, what's going on? And we have to, sometimes we're just talking, like, it's fine, like there's nothing going on. But they do watch, and they watch, and they're really young. My kids are 3 and 2, and they watch and they know everything. And my 3-year-old tells everyone everything, even at the nursery, she will tell everyone what's going on in the house. So I think it's definitely important about how a married couple, like you said, interact among each other. And it teaches the kids how to act and how to treat others as well, you know, how to treat each other and how to treat other people outside the home. And I think unconsciously, many people don't realize that their kids are watching them and watching their behavior, and
Yeah.
they are molding them. Not only, you know, are they molding their own behavior, but also in their future relationships. Like my daughters will look at my husband and that will trigger into them, this is how a man should talk to me. And the same way, this as a woman, this is how I should talk to a man,
Yeah.
talk to my future husband, you know, all that comes in. And I see it a lot now because I see it from trauma that I've had growing up and that I've realized now that I am maybe passing on to, not passing on to my kids, but that I am now dealing with and I have had to work through. And same with, you know, many people that I've come across in my life that have turned parents. I think when you become a parent, you do realize that there is a lot of trauma there, you know, because then you relate yourself to your father or to your mother and how they brought you up. So it's definitely important to not pass that on and to deal with it now.
Mm-hmm.
And you also want your kids to be who you are. You know, you want your kids to embody you. And if you don't think you're at a place where you're, you know, you can cultivate a healthy relationship with yourself, and that goes for self-talk, self-esteem, self-worth, your personal growth. If you don't have all these things and your kids are not being brought up in a healthy home environment, then of course they're going to go down a wrong path, or they might, you know, go to people that aren't going to help them in the best way. So it's definitely important to be a living and breathing example for them, and to grow emotionally and psychologically and address, like I said, your own trauma first. And it's so important. And I think from talking to you, there seem to be loads of people that are doing that now, and that is an amazing thing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think the other side of the coin is like we want to love them so much to a point that we don't want to see them fall. And unfortunately, whilst these children are growing up, know that you will always be there, but
Mm,
it's okay to let them make mistakes, let them fall, knowing that that is going to build their confidence and that is going to build, you know, their critical thinking stage, you know, but you will always be there. I think what I'm saying is don't coddle them depending on their age, and
yes.
be so tough and find that balance between it.
Definitely. One thing that we've touched upon is childhood trauma, and I've said quite a bit about it and about how we don't want to pass that on to our kids. And I don't know if you've seen, there is like a video that's on the social media about glasses, like when you fill up a glass
Yeah.
and then eventually the glass, you know, once you do it, once you deal with the trauma, the glass becomes clear because you're not diluting it with all that rubbish that's come from generations. And
Mm-hmm.
generational trauma is a massive thing, I think, in South Asian Muslims, especially because, like I said, always, especially the women, the men were always told to be tough and the women were always told to be quiet. And
Yeah.
nobody ever dealt with anything, and it just passed on and passed on and passed on. And people would get married, and one generation trauma from one generation from trauma from the other would pass on to that kid. They would get married, and it was just like a never-ending cycle. And now we're at this point where people are like, nope, we want to stop this cycle. We want to stop this to this generational trauma. We want to sort it out, and we do not want to pass it on to them. So, in your opinion, how can an adult who has all this generational trauma or childhood trauma, how do they deal with it? What do they do?
Cool. Very much like, you know, when you use the word generational, it is heavy, right? It's heavy, and you know, a lot of people, we call them the cycle breakers, who are trying to do different. It weighs really heavily because it feels like, oh my gosh, this is unfair, why do I have to do it?
Mhm.
And you know, it is so much to do. And I think, you know, what I want to say is you don't have to do it alone. You can build a community whilst you're breaking these cycles and saying, actually, it stops with me. I don't want any more of this. The intergenerational trauma, a lot of it is within our bones because it is, you know, we're talking about wars, we're talking about immigration, we're talking about poverty, we're talking about things that are really heavily, you know, impacted our parents, and then it's been passed down in how we survive living in the West. And I do a lot of this work with my clients in terms of now seeing that you do have a lot of resources, you've got abundance, and alhamdulillah, you know, we've got a lot of things, and actually you do get to enjoy, and we're not enjoying, but
Mm,
we are still in this survival mode, scared
mm,
that we're going to lose it all, right? Or you know, you might hear parents say, actually, what if they kick us out and we go to the country again. And, there's this fear that they carry. When you're doing this work in, the childhood trauma, what I would say is you need safe spaces. You need to be able to have spaces that you are co-regulating, so you're not alone. Um, Start very small, even if it means just asking yourself, what are some of the things that are so important to me? What are some of the things that are unhealthy patterns that I just don't want in myself anymore? And it's hard to see that. And that's why a lot of people come therapy, because as therapists, we are seeing patterns and we can be like, well, what's going on here? And, and because the narrative for them has been the same again and again, it's hard for them to see that. And I'm holding a mirror in front and be like, well, this is what you're telling me, right? You're being very self-critical. There's the unworthiness or not good enough, all those things. Therapy is a great space. Having peer support is a great space. Regulating your nervous system, we hear it so often and it is so important, but I don't know if many people know how to regulate nervous system. If we're talking about a faith space, you regulate your nervous system when you put your head down on the sujood. That is a somatic practice. Understand that is already healing. You want to slow yourself down from this hustle culture. You want to, find ways to unwind. You want to find ways to relax. You want to, how can you teach yourself to relax and tap into those soft parts of yourself, right? And safe spaces, those are things. But the somatic breathing exercises, the mindfulness practices, all those things is a way to regulate your nervous system. But it as much as you're working, understand that this takes time, and it's about entering slow things into your practice in your day to day, and then working through it. Journaling is a great one. A lot of people will like, I don't know where to start with journaling. If you just Google, give me some journal prompts around breaking trauma, or ask me some questions, it might be heavy work. Do it slowly. And do it with someone, right?
Definitely, I agree. And I definitely think therapy is a massively positive experience. Obviously, not everyone can afford therapy. It is an expensive experience, but it's definitely an amazing experience, and it definitely goes deep and works on you. And it's a feeling of release, because you can release. Nobody is going to judge you. Nobody is going to expect anything of you, and you can walk away and feel like a little bit lighter. One exercise that I would recommend people do is called the 5 aspects of voice. I don't know if you know this quite well, sister. It's about, when you're in a situation that you feel like is really heavy and is bringing out a lot of negative emotions. Write down the situation, what's happening, what's going on. Write down what you're thinking of in that moment. What are the thoughts that are coming in? The most intrusive thoughts ever. Think about what their thoughts are. What's your mood? What emotion are you going through? What's the percentage of that emotion? What's your body doing physically? A lot of the time, people don't even realize that when you're going through these emotions, physically, your body is reacting. It is reacting in a way. You might have a heartbeat that's going faster. You might start shaking. And then what did you do? What was your behavior? How did you deal with that? And what you will do is, doing that in the extreme situations, you will notice, like you said, patterns of your behavior, patterns of your thoughts. You might even read back and think, wow, I can't believe I had that thought. That's a horrible thought. Why would that come into my head? And that sometimes does make you think about yourself and what's actually going on really deep inside. So I would really recommend, like the sister said, doing many practices. And it's not a weakness to address your issues and face your demons and rewire your brain to function at its best. It's actually really, really hard. It's a really hard thing to do. You have to be really strong to do it. And it's a lifelong process. It's a beautiful gift to have a life. Why not honor that gift and live life to the fullest by addressing your issues? And if you love your children, if you have children and you love your children, even more so, why would you not want to do that? I've heard you use a very interesting term, and that is religious trauma. And I equate this to negative experiences with faith, or while learning about religion, and I'm sure you're able to delve deeper into it. And when I never really heard this term, but when I heard it, I relate to it. So what do you think religious trauma is? And can you give some examples, and how again can someone address this in order to have a healthy relationship with their faith and with God?
So every time I use the word religious trauma, I get a lot of hate comments, shall I say, because what's automatically what people are assuming is I am saying religion is bad.
Yeah.
That is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is religion is being used in a very harmful way.
Yes.
So what is religious trauma? Religious trauma is anyone having any experiences that has really deeply left a psychological and impact in a very harm way. There's one talking about sexual assault, and there's one thing talking about a religious leader sexually assaulting. Trigger warning, I should have said that first. But when we're talking about, and I talk about it so often, it's so deeply personal for me as well, because when I think about religion, it is so healing for so many people. It is, that is when I work with the Muslim community who go through suicidal thoughts, and I ask them, why would you not act on your thoughts? And they say, well, I won't, because my religion. Our religion is a protective factor for people keeping themselves alive. And I want you to really deep that for a moment. It's a source of healing. It's a source that is really keeping people, navigating hardships. But when religion is being used in a way where it is religious manipulation, religious abuse, coercion, all in a way that it was never there for to begin with, it leaves those impacts. Using scriptures to control, when leaders are saying stay in this marriage when we know it is abusive, when we know there's domestic violence going on, when we know she or he is being seriously harmed, why are we saying pray? Why are we saying do sabr? Why are we saying you're going to get reward? That doesn't exist. And what is happening is leaving a psychological impact. It's doing more harm, because these are the very same people who want to leave the religion, because what we're saying is, if this is what religion is about, then I don't want it. But I know, and for the audience as well, there's religion being one thing, and there's people who are teaching it is a separate thing. And I need you to really take that in, because there are things where, what I gave an example of before, when you're teaching your children about religion, you want to teach them through love. God's merciful, God's forgiving. He's the best of, all these characteristics. But what you're teaching them is, if you don't do that, you're going to go to hell. That is what you're teaching them. This child is now growing up with anxiety, intrusive thoughts, thinking, if I don't do that, then I'm going to go to hell. This child is growing up with shame, religious guilt, to a point that they aren't able to do anything about it. They feel so embedded in this fear that I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to, God's not going to forgive me. I'm a bad Muslim. Even accessing therapy, people are saying your faith is weak. Don't access therapy. People come into therapy and they're like, I feel so guilty. I haven't told anyone, because it just means my faith is weak, because I'm having to resort to a human. We know that's not true, right? If anything, what I do with them is I unpack everything and build a relationship again. So when you're working, and if you can really connect with this, what I want to say is unlearn and relearn what religion means to you.
Yeah.
Go to safe spaces and learn what religion is about and why it's important to you. Quieten those noise and start from scratch, because you're not perfect. We're not perfect. And, when you grow up in that environment, hearing those things again and again and again, we internalize it all. And even now, sometimes it comes up like, oh my God, Fahima, these things come up. And that's because we've heard it so much more than what we're hearing now. And that is the part of, even with childhood trauma, you reparent and you relearn and you let go of what doesn't suit you, and, really align with what is. And that's the work, because it's really unfortunate. And when I hear of, another example would be people going to pilgrimage, beautiful experience, so connecting, and then you come back saying I've experienced sexual assault. Why are people experiencing that when they go to pilgrimage? And they don't want to say out loud, because one thing is, I want to protect my religion. Another thing is, I feel shame. It's not your shame.
No.
It's not. And it's not the religion. It is these people using religion to harm you, and that's not your fault.
I can't believe that. That's deep, and that is, It's very interesting, and it's sad. It's sad that, like you said, our religion is being used in that way. And I feel bad for people that are going through that. I really do. And for me, I came from a very liberal cultural Muslim household, where there was no emphasis on integrating with, Islam or with Muslims. It was more integrating with non-Muslims and on an education and on employment. And there was nothing really about Islam in the house as much as it should have been. So for me, I don't really think I have religious trauma per se, but there were instances where I would be told, God will be angry with you, God will punish you if you don't do such and such, you must read the Quran, you must pray your salah, if you don't do this, you will go to hell. All of that was more fear than love. And I never grew up in a strict religious household, but I also never wanted to go down that way because I thought this is just all about fear. But I always had in my mind, don't drink alcohol, don't do drugs, don't, no men, all this sort of stuff. Allah will be angry, Allah will be angry. So it was good in that way because it kept me away from all haram, but I never had that connection.
Yeah.
So I think my trauma is probably lack of Islamic guidance growing up. And maybe it's a blessing in disguise because, like you said, now I've got kids. I started from scratch quite a few years ago now, and I made that conscious choice to explore Islam and establish a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from a place of genuine curiosity. And I was in need of guidance, alhamdulillah, and I was like, I want my kids to be like this, but I have got no knowledge and I've got no connection. How can I expect to pass that down? But now, like you said, there's the other side of it where it's like, oh no, but I can't, I don't want to make them pray. We can't just tell them to pray and they don't want to pray, or if you don't pray, you don't get to do this, or there has to be the love into it, and they are getting that love. And alhamdulillah, compared to me, they're so much more knowledgeable about the deen, and they have so much more knowing about Allah than anything else. So it is good. But yeah, I feel bad for people that have had religious trauma and that shy away from the deen because of humans. Because humans have ruined that for them, and it's a disgusting thing. And I think it's something that I'm glad that you're talking about, and that should definitely be talked about more to raise awareness for it.
Yeah.
For the last question, I want to touch on something that's a bit more different. That's interfaith marriages. Again, I don't think many people cover this. I covered a YouTuber recently named, I don't know if you know, Khalid Amiri, who after he divorced his Muslim wife, Salama, it was rumored that he was marrying a Hindu actress. So it resulted in a lot of people then reaching out to me that were in similar marital situations. And I was interested to know, as a Muslim therapist, do you deal with many clients that are in interfaith marriages? What's your opinion on it? And how do you think people can navigate such things?
I have had experiences working with couples or even individuals in interfaith marriages. I think, one of the biggest things amongst all of that is, like what I was speaking about before, is when you grew up with different sets of values and belief, and now you're finally meeting someone in an adult life where you want to connect, you got to think about, what is that life going to look like? Don't there's love, and you got to think about more. There's the mature part of it, which is, okay, if we decide to have kids, what is that life for them going to look like? What do we want to teach them? You can connect with similar values that you may have, and then you need to talk about what the values that don't align, and how is that going to work. Because when it comes to then your day-to-day living, what is that going to look like? When it comes to raising kids, what is that going to look like? There are couples who are navigating it really well together, because one of the things was actually external families had, rejected them. And now they see as they are the source of strength for each other, and they're navigating that together. There's pain there because it meant, like, actually I'm going to disconnect with my family, but it's given power in their relationship to manage it. But there are couples who are struggling because they didn't prepare, just like premarital and couple therapy. They didn't prepare, and they didn't think this will come up, because by then, at that point, it was emotionally charged. They're very attached and they're in love and all those things, and they didn't think they had to have those conversations, because I love you and you love me and it's going to work out, when that's the case.
Yeah.
I would definitely say you need to if you're going to take that step, you need to be able to have those really difficult conversations and what is really important to you and how you want to keep those important things in place. And, you know, if you go to events and family gatherings and people are having these conversations, how are you going to both as a couple stay strong and put some boundaries in place? You know, when people are overstepping, there needs to be a good, unite and strong team, because there will be a lot of noises.
Yeah, definitely. And I think from Islamic perspective, you know, in the Quran, it does say it's lawful for men to marry Christian and Jewish women. But I believe that that was before those faiths started being altered due to, you know, the various changes made to their scriptures. Things are a lot different now. And it's also not permissible for Muslim men to marry women that are Hindus, Buddhists, or atheists. And obviously none of this is permitted for Muslim women either. You know, the solution is, however, if a Muslim marries someone from another faith and they convert to Islam, that you are a way for them to come to Islam, then it's permissible, but it's not always as straightforward as that. And a lot of the time I do see that people convert but are not actually you know, Islamically inclined. They've just said something to make everyone happy, but not actually converted to Islam. But, you know, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for everyone in their marriages and for people that are struggling. I really do make that dua. Sister, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's been really good speaking to you, and I like talking about these things because they're so important and people don't talk about it enough, especially coming from a woman. You know, I think men maybe have their discussions and takes, but for women, there's not enough of that out there. So if you want to, you know more about Sister Fahima, please go check out her socials and follow her. Also, if you need any help with counselling or therapy, I thoroughly recommend her services. You can already see how knowledgeable she is and how she is just a beacon of peace and love. Mashallah.
I do want to say, like, you know, with therapy, as much as we're saying we don't see men, I have seen a rise of men coming to my services. So it's just me wanting to give hope. I went to a podcast not long ago, and so many men reached out to me wanting couples therapy with their wives, and I thought something's working. So we need to have hope. We need to have faith that, you know, we are working towards change and we want it better. And you know, in my service, it's not just me. There's a team of therapists who specialize in so many different things. So, yes, reach out.
Yes, please. How can people reach out, sister? Can you let people know?
Yes, so you can, you know, my socials are fahima.therapy. My practice is called Healing the Mind. We offer different type of treatments, whether it's EMDR, CBT, trauma-informed care. We do premarital as well as couples. But then the other part that I didn't mention is we also offer psychosexual therapy. So a lot of intimacy, which is a taboo, but is an issue in maritals and couples relationship. We offer that support as well.
Yeah, definitely important things that need to be discussed. And that is one thing that I haven't touched on yet, because it is taboo and it is, how do you come across that? But it's definitely something that I think that should be spoken about, for sure. But again, in a safe space, like you've said. Thank you so much. You know, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you so much success in all your future endeavors and bless you and your family. I honestly do appreciate you coming on and giving me this time. Thank you so much. And to everyone that's watching, I hope this has helped you. And please get in touch if you have any further questions. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Take care.
Take care.